In the silence of her grief, a widow takes in an orphaned bobcat to save its life. She soon discovers that the wild animal, with its strange and gentle hugs, is the one truly rescuing her. The old farmhouse stood silent. It was a stillness Clara Miller knew well. It lived in the corners of empty rooms. It echoed in the space beside her in bed. 4 or 5 years since her husband Robert passed, the silence had been her most constant companion. Clara was 57. Her hair had threads of silver, like frost on autumn leaves. She filled her days with work. She was a wildlife rehabilitator. Her small farm at the edge of the Oregon woods was a sanctuary for injured birds and orphaned fawns. It was a passion she and Robert had shared. Now, it was a duty that kept the loneliness at bay. It was a way to pour her love into something that needed it. One gray morning in October, the phone rang. Its sharp sound cut through the quiet. Clara was at her desk, making notes in a ledger. "Clara, dear, it's Eva." Dr. Eva Rosales ran the Pine Ridge Wildlife Center, a larger facility an hour away. Her voice was always a mix of warmth and urgency. "We have a situation." Clara braced herself. Eva's situations were never simple. "A bobcat cub," Eva said. "Female, maybe 6 weeks old. Hikers found her alone. No sign of the mother. She's weak, but she has a spirit." Clara's heart gave a small, protesting squeeze. A bobcat. That was different. Her work was with gentler creatures. A predator, even a baby, was a wild thing in a way a fawn was not. "We are completely full here, Clara," Eva continued. "Could you foster her, just for a little while? Short term. Get her strength up, so she has a chance at a release program." The words short term and release were important. They were the rules. The goal was always to return wild animals to the wild. Emotional distance was part of the job. You couldn't let them become dependent. You couldn't let yourself get attached. "Eva, I don't know," Clara said, her voice hesitant. "Apex predators. The goal is always release. I can't risk imprinting." I know," Eva said softly. "But she needs constant one-on-one care right now. You're the best at that initial nursing. Just a few weeks, Clara. Please." The plea in Eva's voice was hard to ignore. Clara pictured a tiny, spotted creature, alone and afraid. The professional in her saw a challenge. The woman in her felt a familiar pull. "All right, Eva," she sighed. "I'll come get her." The drive to Pine Ridge was a quiet battle in her mind. She repeated the rules like a mantra. Limited handling. No direct eye contact. Wear gloves. Keep her voice neutral. This was a patient, not a pet. The rescue center smelled of hay, disinfectant, and a faint, wild musk. Eva, a blur of motion in her green scrubs, led Clara to a small, warm room. In a carrier filled with straw, a tiny ball of fur was curled up. Its spotted coat was a perfect camouflage. Its ears were tipped with tiny tufts of black fur. "We've been calling her Luna," Eva whispered, "though she's mostly just been a little bug, all curled up." Clara knelt. Her professional resolve softened. The cub was so small, her paws impossibly delicate. Her breathing was shallow. Eva gently lifted the cub for a quick check. Clara saw her eyes for the first time. They were not the fierce, cold yellow of a predator. They were a deep, warm amber. They were wide and open, and they locked onto Clara's. For a long, silent moment, the world fell away. There was no fear in that gaze. There was no wild aggression. There was just a deep, searching look. It felt as if it saw right through the walls Clara had built around her heart. It was a look that understood silence. "She's something else," Clara whispered, her voice catching. "She hasn't hissed once," Eva said, preparing a syringe of fluids. "She just watches." Clara found herself already thinking of the cub as Luna, a tiny, fragile creature with an ancient soul in her eyes. Back at the farmhouse, Clara set up a large pen in a spare room. She filled it with soft blankets, a small box to be a den, and branches to climb. The first days were a careful routine. Bottle feeding a special formula every few hours. Checking her temperature, willing her to live. Luna was weak. She slept most of the time, but she never refused a bottle from Clara. Her tiny pink tongue would lap delicately at the nipple. Clara followed the rules. She wore gloves. She kept her voice low and calm. But Luna seemed to look right past the rules. During feedings, she would stop and just look at Clara's face. It wasn't the look of an animal assessing a threat. It felt like something else. It felt like recognition. About a week later, Clara was exhausted. A long night with an injured owl had left her weary. She rose before the sun for Luna's feeding. She lifted the small, warm body from the den. As she settled into a chair with a bottle, Luna did something new. She was still tiny, but with a surprising strength. She pushed her front paws against Clara's chest. She didn't scratch. She didn't struggle. She just rested them there. Then, she tilted her head and pressed it against Clara's shoulder. She nuzzled in, and a soft, rumbling purr vibrated through Clara's shirt. Clara froze. Her breath caught in her throat. This was not in any wildlife rehabilitation manual. This was not the behavior of a wild bobcat cub. It was an embrace, a tiny, fragile hug, a wave of warmth, an emotion she had locked away for 5 long years, rushed through her. It was so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. The careful wall of professional detachment she had built brick by brick didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces. She slowly raised a hand, her glove forgotten on the table. She gently stroked Luna's soft, spotted fur. "Oh, Luna," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "What am I going to do with you?" That moment changed everything. Clara still told herself she was preparing Luna for the wild. But she knew, in a place deeper than logic, that the bond between them was already too strong. The emotional wall was gone. Luna, it turned out, was a creature of deep affection. Every feeding now began with the same ritual. The gentle press of paws, the soft nuzzle against Clara's neck. It wasn't a demand for food. It was a quiet offering of connection. As Luna grew, so did her expressions of love. She became stronger, more playful. Her coat gleamed, and her amber eyes were bright with curiosity. If Clara sat on the floor near the pen, Luna would come to the wire mesh. She wouldn't hiss or pace. She would rub against it, her purr a tiny engine. When Clara entered the pen to clean, Luna would trot over. She would stand on her hind legs, wrap her front paws gently around Clara's calves, and rest her head there for a moment. Then she would step back, as if she had said all she needed to say. The weeks bled into a month, then 2. Luna was thriving. She was a picture of health, but she was not a typical bobcat. There was a profound gentleness in her. She lacked the fierce independence and suspicion Clara had read about. The time came for the phone call Clara was dreading and longing for. "She's doing wonderfully, Clara," Eva said. "We can start looking at sanctuaries, maybe a release program. They're very selective, but she's a strong candidate." Clara took a deep breath. "Eva," she said, her voice firm, "I don't think Luna is a candidate for release." She paused, "And I don't think I can give her up." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Clara, are you sure? This is a bobcat. You know the permits, the liability, the commitment." "I know," Clara said. "But Luna, she's different. She's incredibly gentle. And Eva, she hugs me. She actually hugs me." Clara knew how it must sound. It sounded like a lonely woman projecting feelings onto an animal. Eva was quiet for another moment. Clara could almost hear her thinking. "A hug. Yes. She puts her paws around me and rests her head on me. She does it every day. It's how she communicates." Eva, who had seen almost everything in her career, sounded intrigued. "All right, Clara, if you're serious, we can look into the legalities. It will be a mountain of paperwork. You'll need an entirely different class of license. Your enclosure will need to meet state and federal standards for a dangerous animal. It will be a huge expense and a lifelong commitment. Are you ready for that? Yes, Clara said, without a single shred of doubt. Luna was not just a foster animal anymore. She was a lifeline. In the simple, honest act of caring for this tiny creature, Clara had begun to care for herself again. The broken pieces of her own heart were starting to mend. The next few months were a storm of bureaucracy. Clara navigated a maze of regulations. She filled out endless forms. She consulted with experts on bobcat care and enclosure design. She hired contractors to build a new home for Luna. It was a huge, secure outdoor space attached to the house. It had trees for climbing and rocks for sunbathing. It had a small, circulating pool and several insulated dens. It cost most of her savings, the money she and Robert had put away for a future they never got to have. She spent it without a second thought. During those stressful weeks of paperwork and construction, Luna was her anchor. Whenever Clara felt overwhelmed, she would go and sit with a young bobcat. Luna, sensing her distress, would come to her. She would offer her signature hug around Clara's arm or leg. Her steady purr was a balm to Clara's frayed nerves. Finally, the day came. A thick envelope arrived. Inside was the final, approved permit. Custody of Luna Miller, the bobcat, was officially granted to Clara Miller. A wave of relief so powerful washed over Clara that her knees buckled. She sank to the floor and cried. They were not tears of sadness, but of profound gratitude. Luna padded over to her. She pushed her head gently under Clara's arm and leaned her whole furry body into Clara's side. It was a silent, comforting hug. "We did it, Luna," Clara whispered, burying her face in the bobcat's soft fur. "You're home. You're home for good." Life with Luna found a new rhythm. Luna was not a pet. She was a wild soul, and Clara respected that. She provided an environment that was safe, but also stimulating. Luna spent her days exploring her large sanctuary. She pounced on falling leaves. She napped in patches of sun. She watched the world with those wise amber eyes. And she continued to hug. The hugs were not just for Clara. Clara's best friend, Grace, a retired teacher, was skeptical at first. "A bobcat, Clara," she had said over the phone. "Are you sure this is wise?" When Grace first visited, she stood nervously outside the strong mesh of the new enclosure. Clara was inside, giving Luna fresh water. Luna drank, then glanced at Grace with mild curiosity. Then, to Grace's amazement, she walked over to Clara. She stood on her hind legs, wrapped her paws gently around Clara's waist, and rested her head on Clara's hip. She held the pose for a few seconds. Clara just smiled and stroked her head. Grace's mouth fell open. "Did I just see? Did that bobcat just hug you?" Clara chuckled. "She does that. That's just Luna." Over time, Luna grew used to Grace's visits. One afternoon, the two friends were sitting on a bench near the enclosure, sipping iced tea. Luna, who had been sleeping on a high rock, woke up. She stretched, a picture of lazy Grace, and walked over to the mesh nearest Grace. She rubbed her cheek against the wire, purring. Then she sat and looked at Grace with calm curiosity. "Go on," Clara encouraged gently. She sang hello. Hesitantly, Grace reached a hand toward the mesh. Luna didn't pull away. She leaned into the touch, letting Grace scratch behind her tufted ears. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Luna lifted a paw. She gently pressed it against the mesh, right where Grace's hand was. It wasn't a grab or a swat. It was a soft, steady touch. Grace pulled her hand back, her eyes wide and misty. "Oh, Clara, she's extraordinary." Word of the hugging bobcat began to spread through the small community. Clara was careful. She never treated Luna like a sideshow. But for trusted friends who understood boundaries, she would allow quiet, supervised visits. Luna's comfort was always the most important thing. One of those visitors was a boy named Sam. He was the 10-year-old grandson of Clara's neighbor, Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies was a gruff old farmer who thought keeping wild animals was foolish. They belong in the wild, he'd often say. But Sam was a quiet, sensitive boy. His parents' recent divorce had hit him hard, leaving him withdrawn and sad. He loved animals. One day, Mr. Davies brought Sam over, pretending he was just dropping off some extra firewood. While the adults talked, Sam stood, mesmerized by Luna's enclosure. Luna seemed just as interested in him. She came to the fence, sat down, and just watched the small, quiet human. Clara saw the gentleness in the boy. "This is Luna, Sam," she said softly. "She's very special." Sam slowly walked closer, his eyes fixed on the beautiful cat. Luna mirrored his stillness. Then she did something Clara had rarely seen her do with a stranger. She lay down near the mesh. She rolled slightly on her side, showing a sliver of her spotted belly. She let out a soft chuff sound. "That's a friendly noise," Clara explained to Sam. "It means she feels safe with you." Then Luna reached out a paw. She extended it slowly through a gap in the mesh. She didn't reach for Sam. She placed it gently on the ground between them. It was an invitation. Sam's eyes shone. Very slowly, he reached out his own small hand and placed it on the ground near Luna's paw. For a long moment, they stayed like that, a boy and a bobcat, sharing a silent understanding. Then Luna drew her paw back. She pressed herself lightly against the mesh where Sam stood, her head tilted. It was the best hug she could give through the barrier. Sam gasped, a small sound of pure joy. "She likes me." Mr. Davies, who had been watching with a stern expression, found his face softening. He cleared his throat. "Well, I'll be. Smart cat." From then on, Sam was a regular visitor. He would bring Luna little gifts, a smooth river stone, a bright red leaf. He would sit by her enclosure for hours, sometimes talking to her, sometimes just sharing the silence. Luna always acknowledged him. She would come and sit with him, offering her quiet company, the soft press of her head against the wire. Clara watched as the light returned to Sam's eyes. His small, wounded heart was being mended by a creature who spoke the universal language of gentle presence. There were hard times, too. They were reminders that Luna was still a wild thing in a human world. One spring, a distemper virus swept through the local raccoon population. Clara was terrified for Luna. Even though Luna was vaccinated and her enclosure was secure, the fear was a constant knot in Clara's stomach. For weeks, she was extra careful, disinfecting everything. Luna seemed to know Clara was afraid. Her hugs became more frequent, more lingering. It was as if she were trying to absorb Clara's anxiety. She would follow Clara's movements from inside the enclosure, her amber eyes full of a deep, knowing calm. One evening, Clara was doing her final check. She was overwhelmed with worry and exhaustion. She leaned against the mesh of Luna's enclosure, and silent tears traced paths down her cheeks. Luna came to her. She didn't nudge her playfully. She moved with a quiet seriousness. She pushed her head firmly into Clara's hand. Then she stood on her hind legs, pressing her body as close as the wire would allow. Her paws rested gently on Clara's arms. She stayed there for a long time, her deep purr a steady, rhythmic comfort in the fading light. In that moment, they were not a caretaker and an animal. They were two souls, offering each other solace. The distemper threat passed. Luna was safe, but Clara never forgot the feeling of that deep, rumbling purr against her fear. Years went by. Luna grew into a magnificent adult bobcat. She was sleek and powerful, but she never lost her extraordinary gentleness. She became a quiet legend in their corner of Oregon. People Clara met in town would sometimes ask, "Are you the lady with the hugging bobcat?" Clara, now in her late 60s, found her life filled with a purpose and peace she thought she had lost forever. The sharp edges of her grief for Robert had been worn smooth, replaced by a gentle warmth that Luna had helped her find again. Luna was more than a rescued animal. She was a friend, a confidant, a therapist with fur and a rumbling purr. She communicated not with words, but with the profound eloquence of a hug. One sunny afternoon, Clara sat on her porch swing. A photo album was open on her lap. It was filled with pictures of Robert, and now, with pictures of Luna. Luna herself was sunbathing on her favorite rock inside her sanctuary. A picture of perfect contentment. Grace joined her, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of lemonade. Remembering, Grace asked softly. Clara smiled, a real, untroubled smile, just feeling grateful for Robert, for this life, and for that incredible creature over there. She looked toward Luna, as if she knew she was the subject of conversation. Luna opened one amber eye and looked back. She rose, stretched, and walked over to the side of the enclosure closest to the porch. She sat down, watching Clara with that familiar, loving gaze. "You know," Clara said, her voice soft with emotion, "when I first went to that rescue center, I was just going to foster a cub. I was so determined to keep my distance. I thought my heart was closed for good after Robert died." She paused, her gaze locked with Luna's. "But Luna, she had other plans. She didn't just find a home with me. She reminded me how to make one. She showed me that my heart could still open, still feel." As if on cue, Luna stood on her hind legs. She reached her paws through the mesh as far as they could go and patted the air in Clara's direction. It was a long-distance hug, a gesture that never failed to make Clara's heart swell. Clara knew their time together was not infinite, but for now, in the golden light of an Oregon afternoon, she felt an overwhelming sense of joy. Luna, the orphan bobcat, had not only been rescued, she had been the rescuer. She had built a sanctuary of love where the most unlikely bonds could heal the deepest wounds. And in that quiet, steady embrace, Clara's own wild, wounded soul had finally, truly come home.